The year is 1958. Dawn in California's Central Valley does not arrive with a gentle blush, but as a sharp silver line drawn across the eastern mountains. Before this light touches the valley floor, Kenji Tanaka is already in his field. The air is cool and smells of dust and distant irrigation. The camera finds his hands first, strong, calloused, plunged into the pale, alkaline soil. He crumbles a clod of earth between his fingers, feeling its dry, resistant texture. It is a stubborn land, a ground that holds the memory of salt and bitterness, much like the men who work. The sound is sparse, the sigh of a lonely wind, the scrape of his worn hoe against a stone, the rhythmic beat of his own heart. This small plot, wedged between the vast, thriving cotton empires of his white neighbors, is both his inheritance and his crucible, a silent testament to a promise made to a ghost. He stands, a solitary figure against the immense, flat expanse. At 38, Kenji carries the weight of two worlds in the set of his shoulders. He is a Nisei, born on this American soil, yet his movements are guided by the ancient, unspoken rules of his ancestors. His motions are economical, precise, honed by years of labor and the philosophy of Gaman, enduring the unbearable with quiet dignity. His tools, a simple hoe and a hand trowel, rest beside him, their wooden handles worn smooth and dark by the grip of his father and now his own. They are more than just implements. They are relics, a connection to a past that was stolen in the barbed wire shadows of Manzanar. He looks out not with despair, but with a deep, settled focus, as if he is in a conversation with the earth itself, a dialogue no one else can hear. Inside his modest wooden home, which he rebuilt with his own hands after the war, a small, plain memorial tablet, an ihai, sits on a shelf. It is for his father, who never left the internment camp. Kenji does not need to see it to feel its presence. Every handful of resistant soil, every drop of precious water he coaxes from the irrigation ditch, is an offering. He is not farming for profit, not in the way Mr. Henderson on the next county over understands it. He is farming for honor. He is trying to cultivate a piece of Japan in this unwelcoming American dirt, to prove that his heritage is not a liability to be hidden, but a source of unique strength. The memory of his father's words about the superior taste of Japanese short-grain rice is a constant, quiet hum beneath the noise of his daily struggle. The camera pans slowly across the rows of his crop. These are not the tall, robust stalks of long-grain rice or the fluffy bowls of cotton that promise wealth. His plants are stunted, their leaves tinged with a sickly yellow. They are a variety of koshihikari, the wii, seeds painstakingly acquired from a relative in Japan, and they are failing. The harsh sun and the alkaline soil are poisoning them from the root up. To his neighbors, both Japanese-American and white, this field is the physical manifestation of a fool's errand. They see a man wasting his family's meager savings on a sentimental waste of water, as Mr. Henderson had publicly called it. They see a dreamer chasing a ghost, and in their pity and quiet disapproval, Kenji feels the familiar sting of shame. The Haji he has been taught his entire life to avoid at all costs. Their story of silent struggle, of planting a dream in soil that rejects it, resonates in countless hearts around the globe. It is a testament to the quiet strength of those who persevere when the world tells them to give up. It is a story that belongs to every person who has ever fought for a legacy against impossible odds. Before we continue Kenji's journey, we want to know from which part of the world you are listening to us. Write in the comments the country and city from where you are watching, so we can feel the global community that unites around these tales of human resilience. Your presence here gives meaning to this memory, connecting us all through the shared language of hope and effort, no matter the distance or the border. The sun has now cleared the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley. The heat is already beginning to build. Kenji straightens his back, the muscles tight with fatigue, and wipes a bead of sweat from his brow with the back of his dusty hand. His face is a mask of serene concentration, betraying none of the turmoil within. He picks up his hoe, its weight, familiar and comforting, and turns back to the difficult earth. It was just another morning, another day in a long, unbroken chain of hardship and silent faith. But on this particular morning, under the vast and indifferent California sky, he did not yet know that the subtle balance of his world was about to shift forever. Kenji's memory of his father was not one of grand speeches, but of silence and soil. Before the war, before the barbed wire and the dust of Manzanar, their family had farmed a different piece of land, one that was kinder. He remembered his father, an Issei man with a back as straight as a bamboo stalk, kneeling in the mud of the rice paddies. He would hold up a single, translucent grain of short-grain rice to the sun, explaining in spare Japanese that this was not just food, but a vessel of their spirit. He taught Kenji that the quality of the grain reflected the honor of the farmer. This lesson, spoken between the rhythmic squelch of boots in water, had become the central pillar of Kenji's existence, a quiet creed he carried from that lost world into the harsh reality of his present life. A promise whispered to a ghost across the unforgiving years. The internment camp had stolen more than their land. It had stolen his father's light. Kenji recalled the endless wind that scraped the soul raw, carrying alkaline dust that coated everything, a constant gritty reminder of their displacement. He remembered watching his father, once a master of the earth, shrink within the confines of the tar paper barracks. The man's powerful hands, made for the plough and the hoe, grew soft and still. He passed away not from a specific illness, but from a broken connection to the soil, a spirit untethered from its purpose. The ihai on Kenji's shelf was a memorial to that quiet fading. Every day, as Kenji fought his own stubborn soil, he was not just planting rice. He was trying to replant his father's spirit back into the American earth, to prove that it could take root and flourish even after being so violently uprooted. His wife, Harumi, was the silent, unyielding bedrock of his world. While Kenji waged his war in the fields, she cultivated survival within the four walls of their home. The camera finds her in her vegetable garden, her hands moving with a fluid grace as she tends to the daikon and cucumbers that supplement their meager diet. She never spoke of the risk Kenji was taking, of the savings that dwindled with each bag of soil amendment he purchased. Her support was not in words, but in the meticulous way she mended their son's worn-out trousers, in the extra portion of rice she saved for Kenji's lunch, and in the steady, unwavering gaze she held when he came home at dusk, his face etched with exhaustion and his hands caked with the day's failure. Her faith was a quiet, powerful force, an unspoken vow that she would stand with him no matter the cost. The surrounding Japanese-American community watched Kenji with a mixture of pity and concern. They were survivors, pragmatic men and women who had learned the hard way that dreams were a luxury. They planted cotton and alfalfa, crops that paid the bills and drew no unwanted attention. Among them was Mr. Yamamoto, an elder Issei who had known Kenji's father. He would sometimes stop his old pickup truck by the edge of Kenji's field, his ancient eyes scanning the sickly yellow stalks. He saw not a fool but the ghost of his generation's ambition, the stubborn pioneer spirit reborn in a Nisei son. He never offered praise, but one evening he left a small burlap sack on Kenji's porch. Inside was aged rice bran, nuka, the old country's secret for sweetening sour soil. It was a silent gesture of solidarity, a passing of ancestral knowledge. The opposition, however, was far from silent. It had a face and a name. Mr. Henderson, the county's most powerful landowner, a man whose vast cotton fields stretched to the horizon like a white sea. He saw Kenji's small plot as an offense to logic, a sentimental waste of water. His disdain was a palpable force in the community, amplifying the whispers of failure. But a more painful pressure came from within. Mr. Nakamura, a leader in the Japanese-American Citizens League, saw Kenji's project as a dangerous gamble. He feared that a public failure would bring shame, haji, upon them all, reinforcing the stereotype that they were outsiders who didn't understand how to succeed in America. He urged Kenji to plow the useless grain under and plant something sensible, to put the community's fragile reputation before his father's memory. He was a man caught between two worlds, the duty to his ancestors and the expectations of his new reality. He was pressured by his own people to conform and dismissed by the establishment as a fool. The weight of this judgment, both internal and external, was a heavier burden than any physical labor. What would you have done in his place? When the voices of experience and practicality are all shouting for you to surrender, where do you find the strength to listen to the quiet whisper of a promise made long ago? Tell us if you have ever faced a moment where your personal conviction was at odds with the world around you, and what choice you made. Sometimes the most difficult battles are not fought against the land, but against the doubts of those who walk upon it. One blistering afternoon in late July, the first true obstacle arrived. It was not a pest or a drought, but a formal, cream-colored envelope delivered by the mail carrier. It was from the Fresno County Irrigation District. The letter, penned in cold, bureaucratic language, informed him of a reassessment of water allocation due to the season's dry conditions. His allotment was to be cut by half, effective immediately. Kenji's eyes scanned the page, but he could see Mr. Henderson's influence between the lines. His neighbors, the cotton farmers, would not be affected. The letter was a targeted strike, a legal and devastating blow aimed directly at his small, thirsty field of dreams. As he stood there, the paper trembling slightly in his hand, he understood that the silent war for his father's honor had just become a fight for his very survival. The letter from the irrigation district was not an act of God, but an act of men, and Kenji understood this with a clarity that was as sharp and cold as a winter morning. He did not rage, he did not despair. Instead, a deeper, more resolute quiet settled over him. His work in the field transformed. Every drop of water was now a carefully guarded jewel. He abandoned the irrigation ditches, which now ran at a mocking trickle, and began the back-breaking labor of carrying water in 2 large buckets suspended from a wooden yoke across his shoulders. The camera follows him on this slow, rhythmic pilgrimage from the farm's well to the thirsty rows, his bare feet, pressing into the cracked earth, each step a testament to his refusal to yield. The only sounds are his own strained breathing and the sloshing of the precious water, a sound that was both life and a constant reminder of its scarcity. The community's whispers grew louder, turning from pity to outright criticism. At the small Japanese market in town, conversations would halt when he entered. Mr. Nakamura, the JACL leader, confronted him directly one Sunday after a community meeting. He stood before Kenji, his hands clasped behind his back, his posture rigid with the burden of collective reputation. "Tanaka-san," he said, his voice low but firm, "this has gone beyond a personal matter. Your failure reflects on all of us. Henderson uses your field as an example of our foolishness. You must think of the community. Plow it under." Kenji listened, his gaze fixed on a point just beyond Nakamura's shoulder. He offered a slight formal bow, a gesture of respect that contained no agreement. He then turned and walked away, the silence he left behind a more powerful statement than any argument could ever be. Harumi's support became a silent, intricate dance of conservation. She was a general, marshalling the household's meager resources for the war effort in the field. The camera observes her in the dim light of the kitchen, her hands moving with purpose. Water used for washing vegetables was saved to boil rice. The starchy rice water was then cooled and used to nourish her own small garden. She placed buckets under the eaves of the house, hoping to catch even the slightest dew or a phantom rain. One evening, Kenji found her by the moonlight, carefully patching a leak in one of his watering buckets with a small piece of tin and tar. Their eyes met across the yard. No words were exchanged, but in that shared glance was a universe of understanding, a renewal of their unspoken pact. He was not fighting this battle alone. The pressure from the outside world took the form of Mr. Henderson's gleaming Ford pickup truck. It would often appear at the edge of the county road bordering Kenji's property, moving at a crawl. Henderson would sit behind the wheel, a cigar jutting from his jaw, and simply watch. He never got out. He never waved. He just observed, his presence a constant looming judgment. The camera frames, the scene from Kenji's perspective, low among the struggling rice stalks, making the truck on the elevated road look like a predator on a ridge, studying its prey. The deep, confident rumble of its engine was an alien sound in Kenji's quiet world, a symbol of an effortless power that could crush his dream without ever touching it. The truck would eventually speed away, leaving a cloud of dust to settle over the yellowing leaves of his crop. The physical cost of his defiance began to carve itself into Kenji's body. He was thinner now, the muscles in his back, and arms corded and tight like old rope. He worked through the suffocating heat of the day, his sweat turning the alkaline dust on his skin into a gritty paste. At night, he would sit at the small wooden table, his notebook open under the flickering light of a single kerosene lamp, meticulously recording the day's observations. The camera focuses on his hands as he writes. The calluses were thick, but the dry soil had worked its way into the cracks, creating a map of painful, dark lines. He would sometimes pause, flexing his stiff fingers, a silent wince crossing his face. Sleep offered little rest, his dreams filled with the rustle of dying leaves and the cold, bureaucratic words of the water district's letter. The rice itself was beginning to surrender. The limited water delivered by bucket was not enough. The plants, which should have been a vibrant, lush green, were a pale, jaundiced yellow. The heads of grain were sparse, and many of the husks were empty, rattling in the hot, dry wind with a hollow sound. Kenji would walk the rows at dusk, the time of day his father had loved most, and feel a profound, aching sorrow. He would touch a brittle stalk and it would crumble between his fingers. This field was more than land. It was a vessel for his father's spirit, and he was watching it die. The scent of the earth was no longer rich with life, but sharp and sterile, the smell of defeat. He was not just losing a crop, he was failing in his most sacred duty. The deepest cut came not from an enemy, but from a friend. While in town to buy flour, he saw Mr. Yamamoto, the old Issei elder, speaking with a group of other farmers. As Kenji approached, the old man fell silent, his eyes unable to meet Kenji's. He gave a curt nod and turned away, his stooped shoulders conveying a sense of deep disappointment. The burlap sack of rice bran he had once left on Kenji's porch felt like a memory from another lifetime. The silent gesture of solidarity had been replaced by a public turning away. In that moment, Kenji felt a loneliness so profound it was a physical weight in his chest. He had lost the respect of the one man who seemed to understand the ghost he was chasing. The shame, the Haji, was no longer a fear, it was a reality. As August drew to a close, a fierce dry wind swept down from the mountains. It carried no rain, only dust and heat, a final merciless assault on the weakened field. The wind howled for 2 days, tearing at the brittle stalks, ripping the few remaining grains from their husks and scattering them across the barren ground. On the second evening, as the wind began to subside, Kenji walked into the heart of the devastation. He stood there, a solitary figure in the twilight surrounded by the tattered ruins of his promise. The camera pulls back, showing the small man in his vast, ruined field. He slowly, deliberately, sank to his knees. He did not cry. He simply knelt, the energy seeming to drain out of him into the very soil that had rejected him. For the first time he truly believed he had brought shame upon his father's name, and he did not know how he could ever stand up again. For days, Kenji did not return to the field. He moved through his small house like a ghost, his presence marked only by the slow, heavy creak of the floorboards beneath his feet. The vibrant energy that had once driven him from dawn until dusk was gone, replaced by a profound and weary stillness. He would sit for hours at the kitchen table, his gaze fixed on the grain of the wood, seeing nothing. Harumi moved around him, her actions a silent language of care. She would place a bowl of rice before him, and he would eat without tasting. She would mend his clothes, and he would watch her fingers move without seeing. The silence in the house was no longer peaceful. It was a vacuum, the sound of a spirit in retreat, a man who had lost his dialogue with the earth and now had nothing left to say to the world. The rain finally came, not with the violence of a storm, but as a soft, persistent drizzle that wept from a grey, indifferent sky. It was the water he had begged for, arriving now as a final, cruel irony to wash over his ruined dream. The sound of it, a gentle, incessant tapping on the roof, became the rhythm of his inner world. Kenji stood at the window, watching the drops trace paths down the dusty glass, blurring the image of the devastated field outside. Each drop seemed to mark the passage of a wasted moment, a failed effort. He remembered his father telling him that rain was a blessing, a gift that renewed the soil. But this rain felt like a judgment, a final cleansing of his foolish ambition from the land, leaving it barren and ready for a more sensible purpose. One evening, as the rain continued its somber monologue, Kenji opened a small wooden chest that had belonged to his father. He lifted out a thin, cloth-bound book. It was not a journal, but a collection of observations his father had kept, notes on soil composition, weather patterns from their old farm, and sketches of irrigation systems. Tucked within the pages was a single faded photograph from before the war. It showed a young Kenji, perhaps 10 years old, standing beside his father in a lush green paddy. His father's hand rested on his shoulder, a look of quiet pride on his face. Kenji stared at the image, at the boy who believed his father could make anything grow, and at the man who had been a master of his world. The photograph was a relic from a life so completely erased it felt like another man's memory. He ran his calloused thumb over the face of his father in the photograph, the paper worn smooth with time. The promise he had made to this man's memory now felt like a child's naive boast. He had sought to honor his father by replicating his past, but he had failed to understand that this new land demanded a new language. His father's knowledge was tied to a different soil, a different climate, a different world. Kenji had been speaking in a dead tongue to an earth that could not understand him. The realization settled not with a crash, but with a quiet, hollow ache. He had not been honoring his father. He had been clinging to his ghost, and in doing so, had led his own family to the brink of ruin, chasing an echo across a barren field. The rain stopped near dawn. In the pre-light stillness, Kenji walked outside. The air was clean and cool, washed of its dust and heat. He did not look toward his field. Instead, he walked to the small shed where he kept his tools. He picked up his hoe, its wooden handle feeling alien in his hand after days of disuse. He ran his hand over the worn, smooth wood, a surface shaped by 2 generations of labor. He thought of his father's lessons, not the ones about rice, but the ones about gammon enduring. He had been so focused on the outcome, on the grain, that he had forgotten the principle behind the work itself, the dignity of persistence, the honor in the struggle, regardless of the harvest. The tool in his hand was not a symbol of failure, but a symbol of the work itself. He stood there as the first silver line of dawn broke across the eastern mountains. A decision formed within him, not as a wave of inspiration, but as a quiet, deep-seated resolve. He would no longer work for his father's approval or for the community's respect. He would not seek to prove Henderson wrong or Nakamura right. Those external pressures had burned away in the silent crucible of his failure. He would work because it was who he was. He would return to the soil not to conquer it, but to listen to it, to learn its harsh language, to understand what it required of him. He turned and walked toward the ruined field, his steps no longer heavy with defeat, but measured and deliberate. He did not know if he would succeed, but he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he would not stop trying. Kenji did not return to the field to clear away the dead, but to read the wreckage. He moved through the broken stalks, not with the heavy shoulders of a defeated man, but with the quiet intensity of a scholar in a ruined library. His gaze was no longer fixed on the horizon of his dream, but on the details at his feet. The camera follows his hands as they gently sift through the debris, feeling the texture of the stalks that had bent versus those that had snapped. He was searching for a story, for a single sentence of survival in an epic of failure. He found it in a small, sheltered corner of the field, a handful of plants, shorter and thicker stemmed, that had held onto their grain. He knelt, examining one not as a farmer but as a student, seeing for. The first time that the land had been speaking to him all along, in a language of resilience he was too stubborn to learn. That night, the kerosene lamp burned with a renewed purpose. Kenji laid his father's old notebook beside his own new one on the small wooden table. He no longer saw his father's words as a sacred, unchangeable doctrine, but as a starting point, a set of principles, not a set of rules. The camera focuses on the 2 pages, side by side. His father's elegant script described the soft, forgiving loam of their homeland. Kenji's own precise hand chronicled the brutal alkalinity of the Central Valley. He was not betraying his father's memory, he was translating it. He spent hours cross-referencing, calculating, forming a new hypothesis that blended ancestral wisdom with the harsh empirical data of his own failure. He was building a bridge between the ghost of a perfect past and the reality of a difficult present, a bridge made of ink, observation, and a quiet, unyielding resolve. The next morning his work began. He walked the desolate rows not with a hoe but with a small wicker basket. His task was a painstaking, almost meditative, search for the anomalies, the statistical outliers in his disaster. He ignored the acres of ruin, his eyes trained to find only the survivors, those few stubborn stalks that had produced full, healthy heads of grain. The soundscape is sparse, the dry rustle of dead leaves under his boots, the whisper of the wind and the soft plink of each precious seed head as he carefully clipped it and placed it in his basket. To any passing observer, he was a man salvaging scraps from a fire. But Kenji was not salvaging. He was selecting. He was gathering the genetic alphabet of a new language, a new kind of rice that would be born not of Japan, but of this very soil that had tried so hard to reject it. He did not attempt to replant the main field. Instead, he cleared a small, protected square of earth behind the house, a space no larger than a family grave plot. Using scrap lumber and old window panes he had saved, he constructed a low, humble cold frame, a miniature greenhouse. This was to be his nursery, his laboratory. He spent days preparing the soil within this small sanctuary, mixing the alkaline dirt with the last of the aged rice bran Mr. Yamamoto had given him, along with compost he and Harumi had painstakingly cultivated. This wasn't farming, it was an act of focused creation. Into this carefully prepared bed, he planted his handful of chosen seeds, each one a carrier of a hard-won lesson. This small glass-covered box was a world of its own, a deliberate and defiant answer to the vast, indifferent sky. Harumi's role in his life shifted from a silent supporter of his endurance to an active partner in his new creation. She saw the change in him, the replacement of desperate hope with methodical purpose, and her own quiet strength found a new expression. She helped him seal the cracks in the cold frame against the coming chill, her nimble fingers working with a focused grace. She brought him hot tea as he sat hunched over his notebooks late into the night, the lamp casting their shared shadow on the wall. One evening she brought him a small, cloth-wrapped bundle. Inside were crushed eggshells and fish bones she had been saving for months, a traditional offering to the soil from her own family's past. It was an unspoken contribution, a merging of their ancestral knowledge into this single concentrated effort. Weeks bled into a month as autumn cooled the air. The valley settled into a palette of golden brown, but inside the cold frame, a miracle was unfolding. One crisp morning, Kenji lifted the heavy glass lid. The camera pushes in past his weathered hands to the dark, rich earth below. There, pushing through the soil, were dozens of tiny shoots, a shade of deep, vibrant green he had not seen since his childhood memories of his father's paddies. They were straight, thick and full of life. He reached in, his calloused finger gently touching a single dew-kissed blade. At that moment, a cool breeze stirred the dry leaves around him. It was a different wind, not the hot, destructive gale of summer, but a clean, northern current that signaled a change of season. It felt less like a threat and more like a quiet affirmation. He nurtured the seedlings through the winter, their survival a daily ritual of meticulous care. By the time the first signs of spring warmed the valley, the plants were strong and vigorous, a small but powerful army ready to face the world. He chose the best of them, enough to plant just 4 disciplined rows in the main field. As he knelt in the stubborn soil, pressing the roots of the first transplant into the earth, the sound of an engine made him look up. It was not Mr. Henderson's familiar pickup. It was a polished black sedan, a vehicle of the city, slowing to a stop on the county road. A man in a dark suit and hat stepped out, holding a clipboard, his eyes scanning the property with an official, unreadable expression. Kenji did not yet know it, but his solitary experiment had crossed a line from a private promise into a public matter, and a new trial, one of laws and not of soil, was about to begin. The Fresno County Fair in early October was a symphony of American abundance, a loud and vibrant celebration of sun-drenched prosperity. The air was thick with the smells of fried dough, livestock, and diesel fuel from the gleaming new tractors on display. Towering pyramids of prize-winning cotton, sponsored by Henderson Farms, stood like snow-capped mountains under the pavilion roof, symbols of a power rooted deep in the valley's soil. Into this scene, Kenji Tanaka arrived not with a truck, but with a simple handcart he had built himself. On it were not sacks of grain, but 24 of his rice stalks, their roots carefully wrapped in damp burlap, their heavy green heads bowing with a quiet grace. He was a silent, solitary island in a roaring sea of commerce, and the initial looks he received were of curiosity, quickly curdling into pity and dismissal. He was a man bringing a whisper to a shouting match. He found a small, forgotten space between a poultry exhibit and a display of industrial irrigation pumps. His movements were a study in deliberation, a ritual of quiet honor. He did not hawk or shout. He simply arranged the stalks in a fan-like display against a dark cloth, each one a testament to years of failure and observation. Beside them, he placed a small cast-iron pot over a single butane burner, and a simple wooden bowl filled with the cooked rice, its steam rising in a fragrant pearlescent cloud. Harumi stood a short distance away, her hands clasped, her presence a silent, invisible fortress around him. The camera focuses on Kenji's hands as he works. They are not the hands of a salesman, but of a caretaker. He was not there to sell a product. He was there to present the soul of his labor, a physical manifestation of his answered promise. A man in a city suit, his face weary from the relentless sun and the spectacle of oversized vegetables, paused his methodical walk through the fair. He was a food critic from a San Francisco newspaper, a man whose palate was jaded by 1,000 fancy sauces and whose interest was piqued only by the authentic. His eyes, trained to find the story behind the food, swept past the boastful displays and landed on Kenji's humble corner. It was the stillness that drew him in, the stark contrast of serene dignity against the fair's boisterous pride. He saw the unusual stalks, the simple bowl, and the quiet man standing beside them as if guarding a sacred object. He changed his course, moving toward the small exhibit with a renewed professional curiosity, his notebook already in his hand. The small crowd of onlookers fell silent, their attention shifting to this unexpected convergence of two different worlds. The critic approached, his shadow falling over the display. "What have you got here?" he asked, his voice neutral, devoid of the local farmer's condescending tone. He picked up one of the stalks, his practiced fingers testing the weight of the grain head, his eyes examining the deep, healthy green of the stem. "Never seen this variety grown in the valley." Kenji simply replied, "It is new. It is adapted." He did not elaborate on the years of heartbreak, the notebooks filled with data, the lonely nights under the kerosene lamp. He allowed the plant to speak for itself. The critic brought the stalk closer, inhaling its faint, sweet, grassy scent. He was not just looking at a plant. He was reading a history of improbable survival, a story that the soil itself had written into every single grain. The air grew tense with unspoken questions. Kenji lifted the simple wooden bowl, the steam from the rice carrying a rich, nutty aroma that cut through the fair's greasy air. He offered it to the critic with a slight bow. The man took the bowl, his gaze fixed on the perfectly formed, glistening grains. He scooped a small amount with the spoon Kenji provided. The camera holds on the critic's face as he places the rice in his mouth. For a long moment he does not move. His eyes close. A subtle shift occurs in his expression, a melting of professional skepticism into something akin to reverence. He chews slowly, thoughtfully. The texture, the deep, complex flavor. It was a revelation. It tasted not of a factory or a commodity, but of the earth itself, of patient care and profound struggle. In that silent, transformative bite, years of shame and doubt dissolved into the warm afternoon air. The critic opened his eyes, looking at Kenji with a newfound profound respect. He did not offer effusive praise. Instead, he asked the question that mattered most in this world of dirt and dollars. "The quality is undeniable," he said, his voice low and serious. "But what is the yield per acre?" A hush fell over the onlookers. Mr. Henderson, who had drifted over to watch the spectacle, crossed his arms, a smirk on his face, expecting a pitiful number. Mr. Nakamura stood frozen, bracing for the final public humiliation. Kenji looked the critic in the eye, his voice steady and clear as he stated the figure, a number born from his careful selection and his father's translated wisdom. A collective, sharp intake of breath rippled through the crowd. Henderson's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. The yield was not just viable, it was extraordinary. The critic scribbled furiously in his notebook, the scratching of his pen the only sound in the sudden silence. He handed Kenji his business card, a simple gesture that was a profound validation, a key to a new world. As the crowd began to disperse, their whispers were no longer of pity but of awe, calculation, and a grudging respect. From the edge of the crowd, Mr. Yamamoto met Kenji's gaze and gave a slow, deep nod, a silent acknowledgement that the honor of the past had been secured. The sun, now low in the sky, cast long shadows across the fairgrounds, bathing Kenji's small exhibit in a warm, golden light. He rested his calloused hand on the smooth, worn wood of his cart, feeling the quiet thrum of victory. But he did not know that this public triumph was not an ending, but the beginning of a new kind of struggle, one that would test his spirit in ways the stubborn soil never could. Years passed, and the silence in Kenji Tanaka's field transformed. It was no longer the quiet of a solitary struggle, but the peaceful hum of a shared purpose. The camera glides over acres of lush green rice paddies, their heavy heads bowing in the gentle breeze, a sight that now stretched across several neighboring farms. Kenji, his hair now streaked with silver and his face etched with the gentle lines of wisdom, walks the rows. He is not alone. A group of young Nisei farmers follows him, their faces a mixture of reverence and concentration as they listen. He kneels, plunging his hands into the dark, rich soil, the same alkaline earth he once fought, now tamed and forgiving. He explains not just the science of cultivation, but the spirit behind it, the philosophy of listening to the land. His voice, once used only for spare replies, is now a calm, steady instrument of teaching, his legacy taking root in a new generation. Among the students is the son of Mr. Nakamura, the once skeptical J-Cell leader. The old animosity has long since dissolved, replaced by a deep, communal respect. Kenji shares his notebooks, the pages now soft and worn, filled with the data of his failures and the poetry of his ultimate success. He holds nothing back, believing that knowledge, like water, is meant to be shared, not hoarded. The camera captures a quiet moment. Kenji hands a young farmer his own well-worn trowel, its wooden handle polished smooth by decades of use. "The soil will tell you what it needs," he says, his words simple but profound. "Your job is not to command it, but to understand it." This act of passing the tool is a transfer of more than just a technique. It is the endowment of a philosophy, a quiet revolution that began with a single stubborn seed and was now reshaping the future of their entire community. That evening, as twilight paints the valley in hues of lavender and gold, Kenji stands in the quiet of his home. The kerosene lamp is no longer a necessity but a ritual, its soft glow illuminating the small wooden ihai on the shelf. He places a small, perfect bowl of steaming rice before it, an offering of gratitude and fulfilled duty. The gesture is slow, reverent, a silent conversation with the ghost who started him on this path. He has proven that a legacy is not just about remembering the past, but about making it grow in new soil. His story is a testament to the fact that our greatest contributions are often born from our deepest struggles, a truth that resonates far beyond these fields. If this story has moved you, subscribe to our channel and give it a like. so that more tales of silent strength can find the light and inspire others to cultivate their own impossible dreams. He steps out onto the porch, the familiar weight of the evening air a comforting presence. He looks out not at a single field, but at a landscape transformed, a tapestry woven from his perseverance. The setting sun glints off the water in the paddies, turning them into mirrors of the vast, peaceful sky. The wind, once his adversary, now whispers through the rice, carrying not dust and defeat, but the promise of the coming harvest. The camera pulls back slowly, leaving Kenji as a solitary, content figure against the immense beauty he helped create. His father had taught him to tend the seed. This unforgiving land had taught him how to wait for the bloom, and in the quiet space between the lesson and the harvest, he had found not just honor but peace, planting a future that would continue to grow long after his own silence returned to the earth.